Aesthetics and art history have long relied on a strict taxonomy to categorize human creativity. We divide the arts into two distinct dimensions. First, the temporal arts. Mediums like music and literature require the passage of objective time to unfold and be experienced sequentially from beginning to end. Second, the spatial arts. Painting, sculpture, and architecture exist as static forms, permanently occupying a fixed volume or surface in physical space. This division assumes a reductive view of reality, attempting to force the complexity of human perception into neat mathematical boxes that separate duration from extension. This conceptual framework carefully places the ticking clock on one side and the completely static canvas on the other. Accepting this rigid dichotomy blinds us to the actual mechanics of human aesthetic experience and how art truly operates in the mind. In his masterwork, The Phenomenology of Aesthetic Experience, philosopher Michel Dufresne targets this exact classification. Dufresne argues that the traditional distinction between temporal and spatial arts is a fabrication. Phenomenologically speaking, it is entirely false. His thesis posits that in the presence of a genuine work of art, time and space become completely correlative and continuous. The mechanism works in both directions simultaneously. To exist as art, temporal works must construct an inherent spatiality, and spatial works must generate their own internal temporality. This intertwining elevates the artwork from a dead, inert object into a luminous, active entity, capable of harboring internal relationships. Grasping this dimensional collapse is a prerequisite for understanding how raw, indeterminate matter eventually becomes a communicative presence. Dufresne begins his analysis by interrogating the temporal arts. Consider music, a form devoid of physical reference. How does an invisible sequence of notes manage to occupy space? Measurable ticking clock time is merely the raw prime matter of a composition, a container rather than the essence of the work itself. To create internal duration, the musician must capture that objective time and situate it within rigid structures, measurable intervals, heavy accents, and repeating rhythmic patterns. These rhythmic schemata translate fleeting duration into a solid spatial framework. Dufresne notes a secret affinity between music and architecture. Both organize space through mathematical laws. Debussy called this melodic arabesques, closing the distance between time and a physical curve. Literature also spatializes time. Compare the precipitous rush of Shakespeare's Macbeth to the heavy, agonizingly slow duration that dictates the atmosphere of James Joyce's Ulysses. We perceive the flow of time in these artworks only because our minds unconsciously build a spatial architecture to contain and measure that flow. Turning to the spatial arts, painting, sculpture, and architecture, we find a symmetrical process. These objects do not move through objective time, yet they possess an internal, frozen movement that dictates their own rhythm through progressions in physical space. Dufresne uses the concept of agoge, the relative rapidity or delay engineered directly into the physical design of a plastic work. The heavy mass of a Gothic cathedral's exterior buttresses intentionally delays the spire's upward yearning. This physical contrast creates frozen movement, dictating an engineered tempo. Painting achieves a similar effect. A flat, static canvas can express the lived duration of movement better than reality itself. Etienne Jules Marey pioneered chronophotography, capturing the exact mechanical sequence of a galloping horse. Merleau-Ponty critiqued this objective perfection. Because the camera isolates a rigid millisecond, it falsifies our experience of continuous time. Contrast this with Géricault's Epsom Derby, which captures motion's secret cipher. Presenting impossible simultaneous movements perfectly conveys the actual truth of exertion over time. The spatial artwork condenses time, actively unfolding its own duration to the observer. When time is spatialized and space is temporalized, the artwork harbors profound internal spatio-temporal relationships. What happens to a material object when it stops submitting to external time and begins generating its own? The object ceases to be a passive thing. It begins to project an expressed world. This expressed world represents the singular, overwhelming affective quality that permeates the work, existing independently of literal subject matter or lyrics. An ordinary utilitarian object like a wooden desk waits indifferently for our use. Picasso's Guernica operates on a different level. Guernica actively addresses the viewer. It makes demands, forcing the spectator to cross a threshold and enter its specific atmospheric duration. Music achieves this same presence. John Coltrane's A Love Supreme generates a sonic world that fascinates and immerses the listener from the opening notes. This affective atmosphere transforms the artwork into an active presence, demanding a negotiation from the observer. Dufresne assigns a specific term to this phenomenon. The artwork functions as a quasi-subject. The quasi-subject is an entity that becomes luminous through its own opacity. It makes its own meaning spring forth in the act of expression. Dead materials assemble into an autonomous presence that addresses the observer. Fellow phenomenologist Roman Ingarden added a caveat. This quasi-subject requires a perceiver to actively synthesize its indeterminacies. The viewer is necessary, yet the artwork's embedded traces of human subjectivity dictate the terms of the encounter. Aesthetic experience functions as an active, relational dialogue with a presence that cannot be fully possessed.